So welcome on Ambedkar Caravan Media, and today we have with us Christopher Jaffrelot, who in the Ambedkarite community needs no introduction. But as beginning of the program, and before I invite Christopher, I would like to say a few words about his contribution to the social movement and to the movement in general. To in India is immense. As we know, Christopher, he has been a researcher with a very different bent of mind. He always believes in collecting data from the field, and through his first-hand experiences and his first-hand surveys. So, as a young scholar, when he came to India, he toured extensively in the central part of India, and he brought up something which was very unique, which never happened in in the scholarship. That he understood the what is now known as the Hindu national movement. And since his foray into academics, he has been producing very deep works which are always related to the current issues. And because of that, a lot of people, a lot of organizations have benefited. He is not just working on the Indian situation, but also he is a well-known scholar of the Pakistani situation, particularly the political, social, economic situation in Pakistan. About his greatest contribution that has come up, besides foray into the academic writings, is his classical biography of Babasaheb Ambedkar, which is a very different sort of a biography where Christopher brings about his understanding and particularly Baba Saheb's understanding in analyzing the Indian situation and the solutions thereof that Baba Saheb Ambedkar has produced. So it's a very strategic biography that I would say. And when the biography first appeared in the French language, it was picked up by our brothers and sisters in Hungary. And that was their first sort of a contact with Baba Saheb's life and mission. And that set them to open Ambedkar School in Hungary. Now there is a lot of things that I can talk about Christopher, a friend of last 20 years, and friends of many people who are working in India. But I think we will find more occasions to speak about Christopher. I remember that 15 years back, Christopher and I toured various parts of Vidarbha. We went to Wardha, we went to Nagpur, we went to all different places, Pune, and he gave talks which were accessible to the common people then. So he has this particular acumen to translate the academic things into communicable language, and that is what makes his scholarship very special. A very hardly, his depth into the data and making that data accessible to the common masses is something which is very unique to Christopher. So without taking much of Christopher's time, I would like to request and invite dear friend Christopher to uh, begin his presentation on democratic revolution Babasaheb Ambedkar. Christopher.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mangesh. That's very kind of you. And you took me on a memory lane when indeed we traveled from Pune to Varda via so many other places. And I hope we'll do it again one day. I'll try indeed today to elaborate on the topic that has been suggested by Mangesh, a very relevant one, Ambedkar and democratic revolution. And to do that, I will share the screen now and present my PowerPoint to you. That's a PowerPoint that is very long, but hopefully we'll have enough time not only to present the PowerPoint, but also have a substantial Q&A session. Well, you may wonder why we have to speak about a democratic revolution in a country that is a democracy already. If we have to, if he did, it's because for him, democracy means more than politics. A democratic revolution is something that has to go beyond politics. And I have selected a quote from a speech he delivered in 1943 at the All India Trade Union Workers Study Camp that had been held in Delhi to illustrate this point, where he says, social and economic democracy are the tissues and the fiber of a political democracy. The tougher the tissue and the fiber, the greater the strength of the body. Democracy is another name for equality. Parliamentary democracy developed a passion for liberty. It never made even a nodding acquaintance with equality. And that's a very deep way of presenting the question of democracy. Something that, by the way, he will reconfirm very soon before converting to Buddhism. And it's another quote that I want to cite briefly. Democracy is more than a form of government. It is primarily a mode of associated living. The roots of democracy are to be searched in the social relationship, in the terms of associated life between the people who form a society. So a democratic revolution is primarily a social revolution. And what I'm going to do now is to present the different phases of Ambedkar's career towards this goal. The objective is clear, and he will repeat that just before he converted to Buddhism in the 50s. Liberty, equality, and fraternity is the goal. And I return to this trilogy at the end of my presentation. The question is how to reach there, how to build a society that is that democratic. And Ambedkar tried different methods. The first one, of course, is intellectual. How is this society built? He studied it so thoroughly, deeply, in order to understand the problem fully. And then he turned to different methodologies. The reform of society, including his own community, the fight for social and political rights, the political game that he played in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and finally, conversion to Buddhism. So there is, as you can see there, a chronology, but there is also a kind of thematic organization. So we'll go by themes and time. You know, this is my favorite way to present things, chronothematic, to combine the timeline and the themes which are so important, the major themes. Studying society for understanding the problem. That is first approach. And of course, for understanding untouchability in the first place, I don't need to highlight that. To analyze for Ambedkar is a prerequisite, and he was a scholar. I want to emphasize this point. I keep reading Ambedkar. Thousands of pages have been written by him. There is absolutely no doubt that this man was a social scientist, was a thinker, was remarkably well read. Everything is footnoted. He has read as much as Bhagat Singh, but Bhagat Singh had little time to do all the readings. Ambedkar had the same kind of energy for books, but he had a longer life. So he's really a library. He's a living library. Someone who cannot be matched, has never been matched, in fact, in the Indian political personnel after he died. And he has studied abroad, as you know. He has been to the universities, the best universities in the US, in UK, Columbia, London School of Economics. So is fully trained and mostly as a sociologist and an anthropologist. I'm not going to speak about Ambedkar, the economist, Ambedkar, the lawyer. He was also very well versed in law. But let's focus only on sociology and anthropology. The two things that as early as 1916, he elaborates upon, the two notions he really conceives, are a version of Sanskritization and this idea of graded inequality. These are two major contributions of Ambedkar to our understanding of the caste system. Sanskritization is a process that will be codified many years later by the first Indian anthropologist of post-independence India, M.N. Srinivas. But it was really something Ambedkar discovered as early as 1916 in the first research paper he presented at Columbia University, where he explains that the caste system could not have been imposed by the Brahmins over societies. It took shape when Brahmins were able to persuade other groups that their values were superior and that they had to be emulated. So the caste system became such a comprehensive social institution when those who were at the bottom of society considered that they had to emulate the values of the Brahmins, and therefore it became a system, and therefore hierarchy was internalized. That's a very powerful argument that he makes. The other very powerful argument that he makes, as again a student in the US and then in London, has to do with graded inequality. By the way, I wanted to show this photograph because I find it so interesting, especially for those who are familiar with Maharashtrian politics. The year of Shivaji, Sahu Maharaj, the Kolhapur Maharaja was the one who helped Babasaheb Ambedkar to study abroad. And the other Maharaja who helped him a lot was the Maharaja of Baroda, of course. And he got all these degrees in these universities and became a lawyer. So the other so important intellectual contribution that I want to highlight is this idea of graded inequality. And I hope you will bear with me, but I want to cite this full page in order to make you understand fully what is at stake there, because this is still true today. What he said so many decades ago is still true today. He says, in a system of graded inequality, the aggrieved parties are not on a common level. This can happen only when they are only high and low. In a system of graded inequality, they are the highest, the Brahmins. Below the highest are the higher, the Kshatriyas. Below the higher are those who are high, the Vaishya. Below the high are the low, Shudra. And below the low are those who are lower, the untouchables. All have a grievance against the highest and would like to bring about their downfall, but they will not combine. The higher is anxious to get rid of the highest, but does not wish to combine with the high. The lower and the lower, lest they should reach his level and be his equal. The high wants to overthrow the higher that is above him, but does not want to join hands with the low and the lower, lest they should rise to his status and become equal to him in rank. The low is anxious to pull down the highest, the higher and the high, but he would not make a common cause with the lower for fear of the lower gaining a higher status and becoming his equal. In the system of graded inequality, there is no such class as completely underprivileged class, except the one which is at the base of the social pyramid. The privileges of the rest are graded. Even the low is a privileged class as compared with the lower. each class being privileged, every class is interested in maintaining the system. Well, that's a very powerful sociological analysis that is elaborated upon by Ambedkar in a comparative perspective also. He says this kind of inequality is very different from the kind of inequalities you find in the West. In the West, you are the third estate that has been in a position to overthrow the aristocracy, the monarchy in the ancien regime. In the industrial societies of the West, you have the working class and the peasantry, which have been able to articulate, orchestrate the Russian Revolution and so many other revolutions. In India, there is no possibility of any revolution because there is no unity among the low, the lower, and the lowest, to repeat his own terms. And the worst part of it for him was the fact that Dalits have themselves reproduced the system. And you have different jatis within the scheduled caste, which are so divided that they don't join hands even for supporting a political party speaking in their name. And all of Ambedkar's parties, including SCF, Scheduled Caste Federation, and RPI, have been affected by this because they could not get the votes of all the parties, of all the jatis, sorry. So he says, the caste system among the untouchables has given rise to mutual rivalry and to jealousy, and it has made common action impossible. Well, that's why analysis is, this analysis is taking him away from communism or Marxism. For the Marxist, class is the unit of analysis. For Ambedkar, he will say that in Annihilation of Caste in 1935, caste is the unit of analysis, the building block of society. And you can't assume class relations as powerful enough for bringing some revolution. As he says, the caste system is not merely a division of labor, it is also a division of the laborers. And the first thing to do for him is to unite these laborers. And it's not only because of their class position that they'll be united, they have to transcend their differentiation in jati terms, in terms of subcaste. This is what he will try to do first, to reform society, to reform his people. And the Baiskrit Itakarini Sabha that he starts after coming back from the West has a very interesting motto: educate, mobilize, organize. And I have listed for you some of the items of the constitution of this organization, and you will see how important for him education was. That's the first priority, to reform society, to reform the Dalits by educating the young children there. From there, he started to fight for social rights. He fought for temple entry, and he fought for access to water, and especially to the water tank of Mahad in 27, sorry. And you see, I have reproduced there the cover of the biography Mangesh was speaking about in English, because that's a clear illustration of the symbolic satyagraha that the Mahad Satyagraha has been. A satyagraha on occasion of which the Manusmriti was burned to show that the caste system is enshrined in this kind of Dharma Shastra. And we return to that because this is a way to show that the caste system is inherent in Hinduism. So to reform society, to reform the Dalit community, and to fight for social rights was the first strategy of Ambedkar. And he tried to do that also in relation to religion. He said, for instance, stop attending Hindu festivals. One day, I forget the year, but probably in the 30s, on the day of the big festival of Khandoba that is so important in Maharashtra, he said, how many generations of ours have worn themselves out by rubbing their foreheads on the steps of the god? But when did the god take pity on you? What big thing has it done for you? Generation after generation, you've been used to clean the village of its garbage, and God gave you the dead animals to eat, a reference to the Mahars. In spite of all that, God did not show you any pity. It is not this God that you worship. It is your ignorance. So again, the idea is to get education for change and for changing things. Well, it's very interesting to see that at the same time in the 30s, early 30s even, Ambedkar realizes that social reform will not be sufficient. And politics should be given some priority. He said this in 1930, you have now a way of bringing about change and improvement in your life condition. That way is through political action, through appropriate laws. You can make government provide for you what you are now denied: food, clothing, shelter, education. It's a very interesting shift. It's not only the Dalits that need to get education, it is also the state that needs to give them education. So Ambedkar somewhat shift the emphasis in order to value the political action, the kind of pressure that can be exerted on the government for getting political rights. That is something he will continue, of course, for years, with two kinds of priorities. One, to get some representation in the assemblies that the British are now democratizing. So he is consulted anytime there is a reform in the making. In 1919, the making of the Montagu and Chelmsford reform, the Montfort reform, is prepared by the Southborough Committee, and Ambedkar was very young at that time in 1919. He was born in 1891, so you can imagine. Says, well, I want either reserve seats or universal franchise without communal electorates. He did not know whether he was so much in favor of reserve seats or separate electorate at that time. It's a very interesting hesitation. He considered that, in fact, separate electorates would be difficult for the Dalits because they would be in a minority everywhere in each constituency. So to quote him, he recommended as a remedy either to reserve seats for those minorities that cannot otherwise secure personal representation, or grant communal electorates, that means separate electorates. The two options at that time seemed equally valid to him. 10 years later, there was another commission in front of which he presented his views, the Simon Commission. And then he submitted a memorandum on behalf of the Bahishkrit Itakarini Sabha, where he argued in favor of universal franchise and a quota of seats for the untouchables, not separate electorate. And he explained why during his speech before the delegation of the Simon Commission, that it's only in case the universal suffrage was not granted for the Dalits that he would campaign for separate electorates. But Dalits got separate electorate because the communal award of 1932 gave that to them. Something he had asked for before in the roundtable conferences in London. And he could not benefit from this, as you all know, because of the Pune Pact that showed that Mahatma Gandhi was against separate electorates to such an extent that he went on fast for forcing Ambedkar to give up this demand. So the first political strategy somewhat failed in the sense that because of Congress, because of Mahatma Gandhi's Congress, to get a separate electorate that had become his priority was not possible. The other political activity that he invested in was the building of political parties. Elections were now the order of the day. So before the 1937 elections, Ambedkar started the Independent Labour Party, and before the and in the 40s, he started the Scheduled Caste Federation. That, in fact, remained his party till the 50s. The Republican Party of India was conceived by him, but saw the light of the day only after he died in 56. The problem with all these parties is that none of them made significant inroads, to such an extent that in 45, 46, Ambedkar could not be even elected. And in 51, 52, he could not be elected. And therefore, Ambedkar considered that building parties was important, but not sufficient, a precondition that was necessary, but not sufficient. One of the main problems being that these parties were seen as Mar parties, and he could not, that was the big problem I referred to in the beginning, bring all the Dalits as a bloc, as a vote bank in a way. That's why he shifted again in the 40s towards another strategy that consisted in influencing the decision-making process from the inside. And he has in 48, after independence, a very interesting quote saying, "We must take advantage of the toggle between the two parties, the Congress and the Socialists, and maintaining our separate identity to cooperate with the one which will accept our conditions and thus derive the most benefit. Power is the key to social progress." So he remains persuaded, convinced that politics has to be given a priority. But it's not only by having his own party. He has realized that the Dalit party will never be sufficient, will not play such a big role. He has to do more than building a party. He has to join hands with others, and he has to play in a very pragmatic manner, one party against the other, one power center against the other. That is pragmatism. That is not opportunism. He has been accused of opportunism, the same way Kanchiram will be accused of opportunism, but it's not the right word, because opportunists are there for kursis, are there for a position for themselves. Ambedkar is not an opportunist at all in that sense, but he's pragmatic. He is prepared to join hands with anybody, provided the objective is served by this tactic. No, this is a tactic more than a strategy, and the objective remains the same: emancipation of the Dalits. So he will join hands. He will join hands with the British, and he will join hands with the British after 1937, also because he discovers that the Congress government in Bombay Presidency is not very progressive in social terms. In September 1938, is very much upset by the Industrial Disputes Bill that the Congress has introduced in the Bombay Assembly, because it aimed at imposing a procedure of conciliation between the employers and the laborers in case of conflict, making strikes problematic, difficult. And the Congress precisely justified this measure by referring to the increasing number of strikes. So the right to strike is one of the fundamental freedoms that Ambedkar wanted to defend. So he was even less inhibited in his inclination to work with the British when he saw Congress so conservative, so socially conservative. So he will join the British by joining, first of all, the Council, the Defense Advisory Committee that had been set up by the Viceroy in the context of World War II. And this committee, by the way, comprised of another Dalit, MC Raja, who had been one of his opponents, but who had rallied around the same Ambedkarite position that we've seen before. He will also enter the Executive Council of the Viceroy as a Labour member. And what is very important to note here is that this is pragmatism indeed, because this office allowed him to play a very significant role in the making of some social legislation. One of the most significant bills that Ambedkar managed to have passed was the Indian Trade Unions Amendment Bill, making compulsory the recognition of trade union in every enterprise and providing the representation of the laborers in the company. In 1933, in a very interesting speech, he says, "What have I succeeded in? What have I achieved as a member of the Viceroy Council?" Well, reservations, 8.33% of the posts in the public service were reserved to the scheduled caste. He also got places reserved for them in the Institution of Technical Education in London. The quota to the Central Assembly had been increased by 1 seat, and technical education, as he will say 1 year later, was now for 68,000 pupils, including Dalits. And last but not least, again about labor laws, the Payment of Wages Amendment Act and the Factories Amendment Act allowed the government, forced in fact the government to regulate the work of women, to improve the condition of the miners especially. So he had joined hands with the British. He had joined the British government in India for pragmatic reasons, and he has achieved something in this capacity. You see him there with British officials as well in 45. Just before that, realizing that the British were about to go, he thought about something that sounds like a utopia. The British will go, the protectors of the Dalits among them will not be there anymore for giving them more rights. So he thought about a kind of partition. The same way Muslims had conceived Pakistan as a separate state, he thought about something that would be a kind of Dalistan. And he said to a British officer, in every village there is a tiny minority of untouchables. I want to gather those minorities together and make them into majorities. This means a tremendous work of organization, transferring population, building new villages, but we can do it if only we are allowed by the British. Well, they were not allowed by the British, and in fact, that was a utopia. Ambedkar immediately after partition realized that the real strategy has to be very pragmatic again. The only working strategy has to be pragmatism again. And therefore, Ambedkar accepts the offer of Jawaharlal Nehru in August 47 to join his government. Mind you, this offer had been made under Mahatma Gandhi's pressure, which shows that in spite of the Pune Pact, in spite of some very deep-rooted animosity, the idea that Dalits had to be represented in Nehru's government, and not only by Jagdeepan Ram, was very pronounced on the Congress side. So Ambedkar accepted this invitation, and again for the two reasons we saw before when he accepted to join the Viceroy's Council. As he said, in the first place, the offer was not subject to any condition, and secondly, it was easier to serve the interest of the scheduled caste from inside of the government than from outside. This is pragmatism to the core. That will indeed allow him to do many things. But before I turn to what he did in this capacity, I want to highlight something rather controversial. We hear these days, this is more or less the official discourse, that Ambedkar had been neglected by Nehru, and in any case, the grand man is not Nehru anymore, but Patel. Well, if there was someone who was very much against Ambedkar in the Congress party, it was Patel. And in the Constituent Assembly, he called on the Dalits to, I cite, forget what Dr. Ambedkar or his group have done. And he added, I feel that the vast majority of the Hindu population wish you well. Without them, where will you be? Therefore, secure their confidence and forget that you are a scheduled caste. And that was exactly what Patel wanted. He wanted that the caste identities were erased, but of course, the benefits going with that would have been erased too. Well, with the support of Jawaharlal Nehru and many other congressmen, especially after Patel left the scene, Ambedkar was in a position to push his agenda. And of course, he was in a position to do that because he was chairman of the drafting committee, a job he got, a post he got because of his command of law. He was recognized as a great expert in law matters, in constitutional matters. So it's not for any other reason but his merit, a word that has now acquired doubtful connotations, but merit was certainly his main quality for getting access to this function, to this great job that he did. So, as you know, the Constitution of India has not abolished caste, but at least discriminations based on religion, race, caste, sex, and birthplace. And he was, Ambedkar, largely responsible for this achievement, the famous Article 15 of the 1950 Constitution. Also, very important, this Constitution prohibited any limitation based on the same criteria concerning access to shops, restaurants, hotels, public places, water tanks, and so on and so forth. And of course, Article 17 finally abolished untouchability. And also, very important, in Article 23, beggar, a form of servitude that remains today so much problematic, was officially abolished. Well, that was on the paper. That was the text. And of course, he was very proud of this text. It was really the probably the best time for Dr. Ambedkar, and I like this photograph that we have used for a cover of a book recently. Ambedkar, the statesman arriving in the Parliament of India, and the man who is building post-independence India. You see him there with the drafting committee members, and you see him there, of course, as Minister of Nehru, taking oath. And last but not least, a photograph that is particularly moving, because you don't see Ambedkar smiling so much very often, is handing over a copy of the Constitution of India to Rajendra Prasad, who had been the president of the Constituent Assembly before becoming the president of the Republic. So he has achieved a lot, but again, on the paper. And immediately after the drafting committee job was over, he made this speech that is very famous, when he said on January 26, 1950, when the Constitution would be proclaimed, "We are going to enter into a life of contradictions. In politics, we will have equality, and in the social and economic life, we will have inequality. We must remove this contradiction at the earliest possible moment, or else those who suffer from inequality will blow up the structure of democracy, which this assembly has so laboriously built." Well, we are back to square one almost. We are back to the definition of democracy we have begun with. For Ambedkar, democracy is not political only or even mostly. The democracy he wants is a social democracy, a democracy based on social and economic rights. And as he says, equality is the key value. So he wants social reform. He says social reform is as important as the constitutional framework. One of the social reforms he wants is the famous Hindu Code Bill. In fact, during the debates in the assembly, he has shown us a lot of interest in an egalitarian civil code. He wants that. But conservatives, Congress conservatives, Rajendra Prasad, Vallabhbhai Patel, are against this, against reforms of Hindu traditions. Prasad, in a letter to Patel, says that Ambedkar's project is made of new concepts and new ideas that are not only foreign to the Hindu law, but are susceptible of dividing a free family. Because, of course, one of the issues is gender equality. And even the president of the Congress, Patabi Sitaramayan, will oppose the bill, fearing that the local notables, the landholders who are part of Congress, would not support the party in the 51-52 elections if such a bill is passed. So on September 25 in 1951, the portion of the Hindu Code Bill concerning marriage and divorce are deformed by amendments, finally buried without Rawal Nehru during the list of protests, and therefore Ambedkar considered that he has been betrayed, that he has not been supported enough by the Prime Minister, and he sends him his letter of resignation from his government on 27th of September. Social reform have to flesh out political democracy, otherwise there's no point. What's the point of having a political democracy if there is no social content in it? Well, that's the last word, the last phase. Well, politics has taken Ambedkar to a point that is the ultimate journey. Politics cannot take him further. As a result, he comes to the conclusion that if social reform is that necessary, Hinduism is incompatible with his objective. And that's an idea he had in mind for a long time. He considered that caste hierarchies were inherent in Hinduism for a long time. In fact, it takes us back to the 1916 paper he gave at Columbia. The caste system was born of Hinduism. And therefore, if you want to emancipate yourself from hierarchy, you have to leave Hinduism. He had said that in 1935 in a very interesting speech that he had given in Yola, saying, the disabilities we have suffered and the indignities we have to put up with were the result of our being the members of the Hindu community. Will it not be better for us to leave that fold and embrace a new faith that would give us equal status, a secure position, and rightful treatment? I advise you to sever your connection with Hinduism and to embrace any other religion. But in doing so, be careful in choosing the new faith and see that equality of treatment, status, and opportunities will be guaranteed to you unreservedly. Unfortunately for me, I was born a Hindu untouchable. It was beyond my power to prevent that. But I declare that it is within my power to refuse to live under ignoble and humiliating conditions. I solemnly assure you that I will not die a Hindu. Therefore, few months before he died, Ambedkar decided to move out, explaining the reasons why he was doing that. He said, by remaining in the Hindu religion, nobody can prosper in any way. Because of the stratification in Hindu religion, it is a fact that higher varnas and caste are benefiting. But what about the others? The varna system of Hindu religion is responsible for such a strange social structure. What improvement can take place from this? Prosperity can be achieved only in the Buddhist religion. So in 35, he asked, where should we go? To which religion should we convert? In 56, he has found the solution. He has found the response. He has tried, he has explored, he has investigated. What about Sikhism, Islam, Christianity? Buddhism is the real way out. Why Buddhism? Well, we are back to the question we asked in the beginning, because that's where democracy really lays. The democracy he defined as early as the 20s in social terms. It's an egalitarian creed. That's a very important point. We will return to it in a minute. And it endows Dalits with an alternative, a non-Hindu identity. You are not part of the pyramid that Hinduism is when you have a separate ethno-religious identity by moving out of Hinduism and embracing Buddhism. Well, these two things are very obvious from the Nagpur conversion ceremony that takes place on the 14th of October 1956. He has himself written down 22 oaths. 6 out of 22, the first 6 ones, and also the number 8 and the number 19 are directly pointing against Hinduism, saying we embrace Buddhism because we reject Hinduism. I shall not recognize Brahma, Vishnu, and Mahesh as gods, nor shall I worship them. I shall not recognize Ram and Krishna as gods, nor shall I worship them. I shall not recognize Gauri and Ganapati as gods, nor shall I worship them. I do not believe in the theory of incarnation of God. I do not consider Buddha as the incarnation of Vishnu. I shall not perform Shraddha, nor shall I give offering to gods. I shall not perform any religious rites through the agency of a Brahmin. I thereby reject my old religion, Hinduism, which is detrimental to the prosperity of humankind and which discriminates between man and which treats me as inferior. Well, thousands of Dalits will convert in Nagpur on the 14th of October 1956, and he will explain that by saying, positively, my social philosophy may be said to be enshrined in 3 words: liberty, equality, and fraternity. Let no one, however, say that I have borrowed my philosophy from the French Revolution. I have not. My philosophy has roots in religion and not in political science. I have derived them from the teaching of my master, the Buddha. In his philosophy, liberty and equality had a place. He gave the highest place to fraternity as the only real safeguard against the denial of liberty or equality or fraternity, which was another name for brotherhood or humanity, which was again another name for religion. You can replace words there. You can certainly replace fraternity by compassion. Compassion was definitely the value the Buddha emphasized the most. And in fact, what you see there, and that's why the French Revolution can be referred to, is a form of humanism. This is in the name of humanism, and Ambedkar in 56, but even before, is the ultimate humanist. He is an icon today. I will conclude now very, very briefly. I don't need to recap. I'm sure the points I wanted to make are clear enough. I hope so. Today, he speaks for the whole of India, in particular because this ultimate humanist and democrat is very relevant in one respect, not only for all the reasons I've mentioned, but also for this reason, that he is always eager to let people exert their critical mind. And that's why he is so much against hero worship. Hero worship is certainly not dead in India, he said in the 40s. India is still par excellence the land of idolatry. There is idolatry in religion, there is idolatry in politics. Heroes and hero worship is a hard, if unfortunate, fact in India's political life. I agree that hero worship is demoralizing for the devotee and dangerous to the country. I welcome the criticism insofar as it conveys a caution that you must know that your man is really great before you start worshiping him. Well, of course, these words were about Mahatma Gandhi. but you can imagine that they are very relevant today still. The ultimate humanist and democrat is also the one who can offer some antidote to national populism, to Hindu nationalism, and to hero worship, for sure. And I'm sure we'll have now some time for a discussion in which these kind of issues can be talked about. Il ne faut pas que tu parles aussi fort, hein, parce que moi je suis au-dessus, là. C'est vraiment pas agréable d'entendre des cris, des rires comme ça quand je suis en conférence. Hein. Je sais pas comment est-ce qu'il faut vous dire. Hein. Tu fais plein de bruit. Tu vas parler. Mais tu rigoles. J'ai pas rigolé une seule fois. Je rigole, tu te rends même pas compte. Engage.
Hello, Christopher, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, sorry, because the computer got some issues.
Okay.
Christopher, that was a very wonderful presentation, and you have summarized, the long history in a very succinct way in a very short time. There are a few questions.
Okay.
That, given the situation today about what is happening in India, and you are being a political scientist, that you can see what is happening in this country today. So looking at the dynamics of the Ambedkarite movement and what has happened after Babasaheb Ambedkar's death in 1956, and now we are in 2020, how do you, what kind of, the strategy the post-Ambedkarite movement should have now even today? What should be the response of the people who are inspired by Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, the political parties and social movements and the religious movements? So what do you think is the critical?
Well, I think the different methods he has proposed remain very relevant to unite scheduled caste beyond, as he said, jealousies, rivalries between jatis. That can be seen as the priority today. It should be the priority today. For instance, you look at the time of elections. We have very interesting survey data that the CSDS is offering us. They show that Dalits are now completely divided along jati lines at the time of voting. So how can you promote the interest of the Dalits if they do not join hands in the political scene? And that's what he was saying. He was saying nothing different. In the case of Dalit parties, not only you have a division of the voters along jati lines, but you have divisions of the leaders along factional lines. What kind of Ambedkarism is this? How can you be an Ambedkarite and fight with another Ambedkarite? So I think what he said remains very relevant. The other thing on that front, the other thing he said, and that is not implemented, is this conversion to Buddhism. How many Dalits have followed Ambedkar by converting to Buddhism? Handful. And for many years, the argument was we would lose reservations by converting to Buddhism, but that's not true since 1990. So there is another sense of direction that Babasaheb Ambedkar gave decades ago, you can say even 100 years ago, and that has not been implemented. So don't look for new solutions. Apply his solutions, and that would open new perspectives.
Christopher, sorry, there are lots of questions for you. We will take some of your more time.
Yeah, okay.
There is one question for you. The question is, how do you see the pragmatism of Ambedkar and its continuity or discontinuity in the contemporary Dalit movement or leadership?
Well, I mentioned Kanshiram. For me, Kanshiram was really continuing with the pragmatism of Ambedkar. You built an organization and you bargain with partners for extracting some concessions from them, because you know that you will never be able to rule alone, to govern alone. But pragmatically, you join hands with these people, and Kanshiram had no inhibition. He would make a coalition with any party, but not losing out, not forgetting that his agenda had to be promoted. That's, I think, the best example of continuity you can go by, and this is something that has to return to. And BSP has somewhat lost this after Kanshiram left the scene. But this is the DNA of Ambedkarism, and Kanshiram was really true to Ambedkar in that sense. Which means, by the way, that BSP should make sure that the cadres, who are really the Ambedkarite people, are respected, are taken seriously are given responsibilities. And Ambedkar was against hero worship. BSP should be against hero worship too.
Great. Another question that is coming up about uh, 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 that how to reconcile the differences between different scheduled castes, and how to bring this fraternity into being so that power can be created. So that's one of the questions. It's a big question.
Well, yeah, this is the question I mentioned before. You know, it is now so clear that even if you belong to a different jati, the stigma that Dalits have to deal with is very similar. And incidentally, class does not make such a big difference so far as the stigma is concerned. So instead of being co-opted, instead of accepting kursis, positions, and therefore make the divide and rule game continue, to realize the common interest, the common status is I think the first response to this question. And when this is realized, when such a realization occurs, then you're in a position to bargain, because unity helps to bargain.
Now, this is a question, this is popping up all the time in the Ambedkarite movement. What is the essence of Ambedkarism? What is it? How one qualifies himself to be an Ambedkarite, Christophe?
As he says, equality, and with equality comes fraternity, is the essence of this ism. So it means no reverence to the superior, no sense of hierarchy, and that's why he is a humanist. So that's the first thing. But Ambedkarism, it's also a very intellectual position. Critical mind, I think, is inherent in this. To exert its critical mind, to constantly resist the sentiments, the passions in politics, to critically analyze what's going on. I'm taken for a ride there. I'm moved by slogans, by passions, emotions. That's not his way to look at things. Why is it so important? Because it means that for him, policies are also key. And today, politics are prevailing over policies. You throw petals of rose on hospitals. Where is the public health policy? Ambedkar would certainly be more interested in having a public health policy than a politics of rose.
Right. So somebody has amplified his question, saying that these different blocks and different organizations among the scheduled caste, do they itself block the Ambedkarite movement?
Well, in the sense that they do not unify it, and they divide it by having so many partners. One RPI will partner with BGP, one RPI will partner with OVC, whatever. These divisions inevitably weaken the Ambedkarite movement mechanically.
So another question there is for Christopher is they are very happy to listen to your presentation, and the question goes like this: Sir, would you care to comment on whether there is a disjuncture between the political thought and the spiritual thought in Ambedkar?
I don't think so. I think they are the two faces of the same coin. Even in 56, after converting to Buddhism, he thinks and conceives the RPI. thinking that, yes, he is now more in a spiritual mood, but politics must remain also an objective, a strategy. So these are the two sides of the same coin. You know, you fight for compassion, the Buddhist way, but Buddhism is not only a spiritual message, it's also a social message. And therefore, in the world, in the political scene, you have to promote the values that Buddhism found relevant many years ago, and they are still relevant. So I don't think there is a disjunction. On the contrary, he was very pissed off by those who followed Shokamela, who thought that you could reach God, you could reach equality via God, via bhakti. He said, no way. No, this is opium of the people, if you were using Marxist terms. You know, this is a way to be confused. So do not diverse religious worship, religion, from social realities. And that's what Buddhism is so good at. Buddhism helps you to keep together the spiritual dimension and the social dimension.
Christophe, there is a question which has come up, which goes like this: would you like to know why Ambedkar did not pursue separate electorate after independence?
He tried. You know, that's a very interesting question. We've gone deeply with one of my colleagues in the debates which were part of the minorities committee, because as you know, most of the articles of the Indian Constitution were drafted in subcommittees. And in this committee, one of the lieutenants of Ambedkar, Nagappa, tried hard to retain something of the separate electorate. What was it? For qualifying for being a candidate in a reserved constituency, the applicants had to get a certain percentage of the votes of the Dalit voters only. That was a kind of primary system. And Vallabhbhai Patel was dead against that, and he ridiculed Nagappa during the debate. So Ambedkar tried, failed. The real question is, why didn't he try more? Because you can say, he could have said, I resign. I don't have separate electorate, I resign. Well, at that time, I suppose, he thought that a new India was in the making. Other laws will be passed, outlawing untouchability and so on and so forth. So I think he thought there was some hope, and the Dalits could do without separate electorate. But I repeat, he did try to have something like a proxy to separate electorate, and Vallabhbhai Patel made it impossible.
Christophe, this is a question for you, sir. Is there any role of violence as instrument of revolution or violence as energy in Babasaheb's democratic revolution?
No, Babasaheb was absolutely against violence. He even emulated sometimes somewhat Mahatma Gandhi's Ahimsa. You know, the Mahat Satyagraha is one of these examples. But more importantly, he believed in law. He believed in constitutional reforms action. But, you know, that was in the 50s, when hope was still possible. It would be very interesting to listen to him today if he came back and realized that after so many decades, law has not made such a big difference. But at least during his lifetime, he was absolutely against violence, and he was for constitutional means, not for violent means.
This is perhaps a last but one question. And how do you connect Ambedkar with John Dewey? That's the question.
I think this democratic culture comes from John Dewey, but not only, from so many other Western authors. You know, he is in that sense very close to Nehru, who was equally influenced by these authors and philosophers. What is remarkable in the case of Ambedkar is that he has learned democracy, pragmatism from John Dewey, and he has completely Indianized them. And as he says, I don't find liberty, equality, fraternity in the French Revolution. I find them in Buddhism. So he has completely internalized, vernacularized, Indianized values he had learned from the West. And indeed, you can make this argument. Also more so, as I said, religion has to remain part of our life. So he's not for a secularization process the way we've seen it in the West. And that's one of the reasons why he is very Indian. He is probably more Indian than many others.
Christopher, there is now a new research coming up which details about the time between the transfer of power, the period of transfer of power, where the Congress was hell bent on pushing Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar away from the Constituent Assembly, and we know that Patel was dead against Babasaheb Ambedkar entering into the Constituent Assembly, and it has to be left with to the Bengali scheduled caste and their great work to put Babasaheb Ambedkar in the Constituent Assembly. But before also that, when this process was taking place, Babasaheb Ambedkar sort of went to England, and he talked to Winston Churchill. He went to his house, and they had a long discussion. Jesus Chavez, a scholar on Ambedkar, he talks about these all different facts which have now emerged. And also, Babasaheb Ambedkar was, arguing with the British politicians that you cannot just hand the Dalits to the upper caste Hindus. And also now, he was trying to approach the UN. He was preparing the memorandum to approach to the UN. In fact, when Indians were talking about the problem of the Indians in South Africa, the South African president shot back saying that you have your own problem of Dalits in your country. So this some people now there is no concrete evidence except this Sheshrao More's book that Gandhi wanted Babasaheb Ambedkar to to be the part of the government. So how this great lobbying that Babasaheb Ambedkar had done international way to put the situation of his people in focus when the transfer of power was taking place. So some people argue, or a lot of people argue that Gandhi had no role to play, and there is no direct evidence to say that he was responsible for that. So how do we reconcile all these things which are coming up these days?
Well, you have to avoid rumors and you have to go by facts. The fact is that Nehru's government was somewhat a national government. And not only Ambedkar was there, but Shyam Prasad Mukherjee was there. It's interesting to see that they wanted different facets of the political sphere to be represented, which was the remarkable achievement. Before party politics prevailed, let's build the nation. And that's what he said in his presentation of the Constitution. He has a very interesting speech where he says, well, we do not want to give India a socialist regime, a communist regime, a liberal regime, a capitalist regime. We want to leave it open. So we built the framework.
Right.
We built the base of the pyramid, if you want. And politics will decide Indians will decide by voting what do they want. So he was at that time very hopeful, and I think because that was the philosophy of not only Mahatma Gandhi but even more clearly Jawaharlal Nehru. Nehru was certainly in this I would say mood of making India in a position to choose its path. But let's be together for framing the constitution that will make this political competition possible.
Yeah.
So I think the facts speak in favor of that. But of course, as soon as the frame was ready, competition comes back.
Christopher, that's very wonderful comment. I think the speech in the Constituent Assembly of 17 December 1946, when different members belong to different political party, and Babasaheb Ambedkar was the member of his own right. In his own right, he was like an independent person. They are not belonging to any political foray there. And I think the remarkable speech of 17 December 1946 has turned the table.
Yeah.
Because I think that was a pivot on which things started moving, and this lot of lobbying and internationalism and international pressure. I think there are a lot of conditions, as we know that a single condition doesn't matter. But coming back to your present work, Christopher, where are you focusing your scholarship now? Because you are known as the scientist who studies the Pakistani politics. You are often on the Western media to talk about what is happening in South Asia, in Southeast Asia. You have also edited a book on China. So you are entering into a lot of domains. So at this moment, this movement.
Well, two things will appear very soon. Two things will appear very soon. Yeah. One is a special issue of a journal that I have co-edited with Gilles Verniers from Ashoka University, Studies of Indian Politics, as a special issue on the 2019 elections.
Right.
And there I have a very important article for me. I don't know if it will be important for you, but it's very important for me, where I show that many Dalit voters supported BJP in 2019. And I have tried to understand this. So that's one of the questions I'm asking. And the other thing you will see very soon is a book on the emergency. The emergency has not been studied on the basis of archives very easily. I was very lucky to get access to the Shah Commission archives and to all the hearings that this commission has registered. So it's many volumes that we've worked on with one of my students, former students, Pratinav Anil. So this book will be published by Hearst in UK, and there'll be an edition sometimes this year. And then my next book will be on Modi's India, but that will be for 2021.
That's a lot on your plate, Christopher. And, it has been always wonderful to talk with you and, listen to you.
Thank you, Mangesh.
Our generations have benefited a lot by reading your books like India's Silent Revolution and also Hindu Nationalism. I think you are a rare scientist who has tried to look at the different diverse phenomenon in this country. Particularly, some of your work on the Indian Muslims today is so relevant for the people to understand as we talk about, because we have hardly spoken about the Muslim problems in India, which is very critical.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for joining us today, and we would like to have you more and listen to your thinking. And thank you for bringing up this very important point when you define Ambedkarism as a critical inquiry into what is happening around. I think that was beautifully explained and beautifully put up, and pinning down equality as the governing principle of the practice of Ambedkarism. I think this, if we can take this to ahead, the equality and the critical mind of inquiry into what is happening around, I think we will be well set on our path. There were a lot of audiences today, Christophe, and a lot of people listen to you throughout the country. And we are very happy to have you. Jai Bhim, and see you soon.
See you soon, Mangesh. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you. Wait.